At the end of it, we may well have the three main protagonists, the US, Israel, and Iran, each claiming victory, even as each will be strategically worse off. There's no going back to the 27th of February where oil, aviation, all this was flowing nicely.
If the US wanted to have any exit strategy for this or a diplomatic solution, they wouldn't be killing everybody possible who can sit and talk to them.
Iran has taken huge losses. The question is Iran still maintaining leverage?
On day 18, who do you think is winning and who is losing? Welcome to the Fourcast. I'm Matt Frei in Jerusalem today. You probably won't be able to see the old city of Jerusalem behind me, but that is prime real estate for the world's three great monotheistic religions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. And yesterday, one of the Iranian rockets shot down by the Israelis landed perilously close to the Al-Aqsa Mosque. So we're in the thick of it. We might get some alarms in the next hour or so that compete with the sound of bells and the muezzin. So it's an interesting neighborhood, to put it mildly. And it's been a big day for news because we heard this morning from the Israeli side that Ali Larijani, perhaps the de facto leader of Iran at the moment, one of the key figures historically in Iran, who's had a number of key jobs, has been killed by an Israeli airstrike. This has been confirmed by the Israelis, but not yet by the Iranians. In other news, the head of the Basij militia, when I say militia, what I really mean is a kind of million-man thug army, largely responsible for suppressing domestic unrest and the protests that we saw in January. This man, Gholam Reza Soleimani, has also been killed by the Israelis. That has been confirmed by the Iranian regime. So a lot of stuff going on, the usual airstrikes, of course, the Israelis again doing that, but also launching their attacks, massive attacks on southern Lebanon to take out Hezbollah. So to try and get a sense on day 18 of who is actually winning this war so far, I know it's early days, but that is the key question for our podcast today. I've got two guests here to discuss this. One is Emile Hokayem. He's Director of Regional Security at the International Institute for Strategic Studies. He's in London today for us. And Muhanad Seloom. He's the Assistant Professor of International Politics and Security at the Doha Graduate Institute in Doha, where he is for us today. Welcome to you both, gentlemen. It's a big day. Let's start then with this rather tricky question, because the different players in this war are defining victory in different ways, almost on a kind of day-by-day basis. So first to you, Emile, on day 18, who do you think is winning and who is losing?
A very tricky question. I don't think anyone is clearly winning at this point. The danger is to go just by the metrics. And the metrics would tell you that the US and Israel are accomplishing a massive military victory, which would be true. The question is who's building leverage over time, and I think that the Iranians are. Look, the way this war is playing out leads us to an exquisite irony in a way. At the end of it, we may well have the three main protagonists, the US, Israel, and Iran, each claiming victory, even as each will be strategically worse off, and this is the nature of asymmetric conflict that we see. The Iranians have several advantages. They want this war to last as long as possible. They have the advantage of geography, and they have high pain tolerance. The Americans, there are high expectations about what they can do in terms of maritime traffic, about the post-conflict situation. The Israelis, essentially, they don't care. What they want is to degrade Iran's, military power, and then they're not interested in what comes next, as long as Iran can no longer project power. So we're judging them by very different standards. And I would argue that Iran is not doing badly. Iran has figured out how to align means and ends. And while the numbers are not looking good for the Iranians, they have developed leverage, significant leverage, because of their ability to disrupt Hormuz. They've imposed a new status quo. There's no going back to the 27th of February where oil, aviation, all this was flowing nicely.
Okay, so that's quite a complicated picture you've painted there. But essentially, what I hear you saying is that the Iranians have scored a kind of victory by just, clinging on and still being in charge of something, although we're not quite sure who exactly is in charge and what they're in charge of. There was a report, by the way, today as well that Mustafa Khamenei, who took over from his father, may be treated for his injuries in Moscow. This is something the Russian Foreign Ministry has denied, but suffice it to say that we haven't seen him or heard from him in recent days since he was appointed. Muhanad, do you agree with that assessment by Emile, or do you think actually it's been more of a victory for Israel and the United States?
Well, I think it's more of a victory for Israel and the United States, but maybe we have to go a little bit deeper. I agree with Emile that numbers look good for the U.S. and for Israel, but they are, they cannot be translated on the ground. So the U.S. has started off with saying that we want regime change, we want the whole Ayatollah, mullahs, regime to be changed, and this cannot be changed from the by planes and from the air. But at the same time, the metrics, I will come to Hormuz maybe at the end. But if we look at what happened since the 28th of February, almost the whole, the whole leadership have been decimated, have been assassinated. And the process is going on. The campaign, the military campaign is not finished yet. If we want to have a comparative, case, let's look at Iraq in 1991 and Iraq in 2003. The U.S. took between 4 and 6 weeks to attack Iraq. But then even Iraq, which was eventually invaded, not many of its leadership was assassinated. And because, they had cohesion inside it, they had good security, relatively good security services that protected its leadership. While Iran, last June, we have seen that, many of its leaders, even though they were not the first in line, they were the second line, they were assassinated. And this time around, the first day, the U.S. and Israel assassinated 39 of the leadership, including the Ayatollah Khamenei. And now the son is injured, reportedly. So what we're looking at here is the U.S. being able to degrade what Iran has, its military capabilities, decapitate its leadership, and cause a lot of disruption. Because, I would, refer to what you said, Matt, that, we don't know who's leading Iran now. We have Araqchi, we have the political side of the, of Iran, because Iran has two, if you like, a dual system where there are, there is the president, the ministers, etc., and minister of defense, but also they have the IRGC, which seems to me to be leading, the charge. Then I agree also again with Emile that the Hormuz Strait is an issue, but how long Iran can hold that against the U.S. Ongoing campaign, and they have this in the plans. Let's not forget that both Israel and the United States have been planning this for decades, not for years, for decades. They knew that this day would come and they would confront Iran. Equally, Iran had been planning this defense for decades as well. But to me, Iran does not seem to be doing very well, neither militarily nor strategically. And I think Iran, is on its back foot at the moment. And, we can talk more about its proxies in the region, how they are widening this conflict, and neither there is not doing very well.
I want to talk about the Straits of Hormuz, which we are talking about far too much these days, but we have to, and we've all become geographers and cartographers, haven't we, in a minute. But first of all, Emile, tell us a little bit about the two people who were killed today, Gholam Reza Soleimani and also Ali Larijani. I mean, especially Larijani, he was kind of regime royalty, wasn't he? He was very well connected, and he's been a veteran for many years in lots of different roles. Can you tell us about him?
Yeah, I mean, he's one of the most recognizable figures of the Islamic Republic. He belongs to a family that has provided a number of apparatchiks in the system. He served as Speaker of Parliament. He has at times challenged other leading politicians. He had some international experience. He served as the head of the National Security Council, for instance, and fundamentally, he was someone who played across factions. He was not the stalwart of the most hardline faction. Uh, I'm not trying to suggest that he was a total moderate and reformist. He was not. The point is that someone like Larijani would have been someone that had enough credibility inside to sell a diplomatic solution and had enough experience to deal with outside actors. And one of the downsides of the current strategy is that if at one point we want to get to a resolution, who do we talk to in Iran? Who has enough credibility inside the system? As for the other, the Basij force is a strong paramilitary force that is associated with the Revolutionary Guard. They are, as you said, the thugs that enforce the will and the ideology of the Islamic Republic on Iranian citizens. They're the muscles who control checkpoints and can storm schools and commit some of the large scale exactions, atrocities that we saw in January. They are fundamental for the coercive control. The control by coercion of the Islamic Republic, and they provide manpower to the IRGC when needed. So these are significant hits, and I want to be clear that Iran has taken huge losses in the past two plus weeks. The question is Iran still maintaining leverage? Has Iran figured out the center of gravity of that effort? And I would argue that by imposing a new status quo in the Strait of Hormuz, it has. You can decapitate, you can take out as many people as you want. You don't need to hold the straits. You need to pose a credible risk to navigation and make it more complicated for the other side to operate in it. And so, the operation for the moment, yes, it's been years and decades in the planning, but it has failed to address a central issue, which is, free flow of trade and energy that has global implications. And I don't think the Americans or the Israelis, for that matter, are ready to turn the tide on that. It's going to take much longer than the world economy and certainly regional economies can take.
Muhanad, are you surprised by the fact that the Iranians, for now at least, have been able to kind of have a chokehold on the world economy through the Straits of Hormuz? If Emile is right and they've been planning this for years, if not decades, this is kind of one of the obvious points that people, have been pointing to. And I remember hearing about the Straits of Hormuz and this possibility decades ago when I was a very young journalist. And here we have this nightmare scenario unfolding. What happened? What went wrong?
Well, nothing went wrong. I think the US, by design, and Israel, they knew that this would happen, and this is part of the pain they seem to me that they're willing to take. This, Emile mentioned the diplomatic or the diplomatic exit strategy. The US strategy and Israeli strategy does not seem to me that, by design, it doesn't have any kind of exit strategy. What they want is the end of the regime. And it seems it's going in that direction. You wouldn't, if the US wanted to have any exit strategy for this or a diplomatic solution, they wouldn't be killing everybody possible who can sit and talk to them, including Larijani. So what they're doing, basically, they're progressing with this, saying that, the center of our attention is not Hormuz, despite the fact that it is very important. And they will try to do something to minimize some things to minimize the effect, the negative effects of the State of Hormuz or the Strait of Hormuz on the international economy. But to me, it doesn't seem that President Trump is caring too much about it. He said this very clearly. He said that, the Asian countries, European countries, they should come in and help with clearing or facilitating the flow of international trade through the State of Hormuz, but he's not willing to do the hard work. And he said that very clearly. He said that the U.S. economy is not dependent on the Strait of Hormuz, and we don't import as much oil. So to me, it seems that the US and Israel, they're going in that direction, and they want to focus on what is happening in Tehran and how they can change the regime in ways that would make this regime does not pose any danger to its neighbors or to US and Israeli interests.
Right, but Muhanad, I mean, the president of the United States who started this war 18 days ago, and many people still think it was a war of choice rather than necessity, although the view here in Israel is rather different on that, as you know. Many people would say you cannot declare victory, Donald Trump, even if you really, really want to, if the price of a barrel of oil is over $100, because that wasn't part of the plan. And it means that this victory here looks and feels like a defeat to people at the gas pump in Pennsylvania.
Well, indeed, and so I think that's why the president, President Trump and Israel, they're saying that we will continue this war. We're not willing to sit and talk just yet. We think that we can achieve more things, more, if you like, advances on the battlefield than by talking to the Iranians. They don't think that it is, the time to talk to the Iranians or have any kind of diplomatic exit strategy. Have a look at, for example, Oman. The Omani government already talked to the US and to Iran, and they are one of the credible channels. Qataris as well, they have back channels with Iran. But then Iran itself is not very much interested, neither the US. So what we are looking at here is that both parties, they're locked into this. They're saying that we're not there yet. We need to do more on the battlefield, and then we will talk, if at all. The US does not seem to me planning to sit and talk to the Iranians. They think they can finalize things on the ground.
Emile, even if the remnants of the regime in Tehran manage to use the Straits of Hormuz and their geography to their advantage, at the end of the day, blocking the straits also means that they are able to export less oil to the people who've been buying it. I mean, maybe they can do a special deal here, but it's not a done deal, as it were. And also, they're not projecting power anymore. The ring of fire has been, snuffed out. So I just wonder how long, the regime that's clinging on at the moment can carry on clinging, as it were, especially when so many of its own people are probably cheering right now that Ali Larijani and indeed the supreme leader are dead.
Look, first, I'm in total agreement when it comes to Iran's power projection in the region. I mean, Iran's networks of influence were here to deter and punish primarily. Yes, it was about projecting influence in a number of countries, but it was about deterring the US and Israel and punishing them if need be. And at this point, they're unable to do that. They're exhausted. The most formidable actor in this galaxy was Hezbollah in Lebanon. Yes, it will put a tough fight against tough fight against Israel in Lebanon. It will bleed the Israelis, but it won't change the Israeli calculus or the US calculus for that matter. So Iran did take a massive hit on its regional power, its credibility, I would say, because all this was profoundly mismanaged on the part of Tehran since day one, right? I mean, Iran had sustained that security architecture to deter Israel, and then a pretty small actor within the system, Hamas in Gaza, starts a chain reaction that affects the core. It was supposed to be the other way around. When Hezbollah came under attack in Lebanon in 2024, the Iranians were nowhere to be seen. They did not jump into the fight. So there is a lot of trouble. There is a lot of tensions in this. Now, however, it's different when it comes to, I think, the Islamic Republic in Iran proper. Yes, Iran is no longer the regional power that it was, a year ago. It's much diminished. It's poorer. It's losing critical infrastructure. But the regime itself is standing. It has a sense of purpose. It's here to fight, to resist, to survive. They can try to change the domestic economy. They will struggle to get the resources if they cannot import stuff. More importantly, export their oil. So I'm not telling you things are going to be nice and easy ahead. I think Iran is going to go through very traumatic times, but for the foreseeable future, they can impose a cost on regional economies and on the global economy. And here's my disagreement with Muhanad. While the Israelis were fine, what happens in the Strait of Hormuz is not their issue. That the way they look at Iran was at this overwhelming threat, and the cost was worth it. For the U.S., it's a very different story. The U.S. is risking quite a lot. It's risking its credibility. It's risking the global economy. It looks incompetent in the eyes of its regional partners. If you're an Asian power looking from far and you depend on Gulf energy, you're wondering what this is about. And guess what? You may have to actually talk to the Iranians and perhaps bribe them along the way, pay some kind of duty to get some oil out. If you are in East Asia or in South Asia and need to fuel your economy and get your tanker out of the region. So I think we need, not out of support, but we need to credit the Iranians with having achieved strategic effect from their perspective. This is something they for the moment they can use as currency. It is real leverage. On the long term, I think that the Iranian system is going to struggle to explain to its own population why this massive cost was worth taking on. What the prospects are for the future, and what is the ethos of that regime, because it is going to transform. That regime is already transforming, I think, with the rise of a very different IRGC elite that wants to see a very militarized system.
I mean, Muhanad, we really have no idea what Iran will look like at the end of this process, do we? Will it be a sort of a smaller, more concentrated, more vicious form or shadow of its former self? Could it be civil war? Will it be some kind of muddling through, like in Libya after Gaddafi, which is a kind of civil war? Will it be, or could it be a version of, I don't know, Sweden in the Middle East? I'm exaggerating, of course, but a peaceable, civilized state that, that takes up, all the great Persian traditions, of culture and this, that, and the other. Persian exceptionalism reinvented for the modern era. Do you think which one of those scenarios is the most likely?
I think I will start from there. What we're looking at here is an Iran that has been decapitated. So which regime we are talking about that would lead, whatever is the next stage. So there is no Khamenei, and the son, we did not even hear his voice, the new Ayatollah, who is supposed to lead the country into the second phase. Most of the first line of commanders of the IRGC have been assassinated. We're talking also about most of the commanders of the armed forces have been assassinated. So which Iran we're talking about, and which strategy Iran has? What do they want to do next? I think that's a massive question, not for us only, but also for the Iranian people. And I'm not talking here in terms of trying to criticize, to make Iran look weaker than they are. Iran is on its back foot. There is no doubt about that. The US has the upper hand when it comes to the military power and military might. And as well as the war is ongoing. It's not stopping. As we talk now, there are probably planes all over Iran attacking thousands, hundreds of targets, just like what the US is saying. So what we're looking at here is Iran that is a transforming into something new. Would the regime fall? This is what the US is trying to do, I think, along with Israel. They want to have the people rise, against the regime once the regime is weak enough. But I think the bigger question that he posed rightly, and I agree with Emile as well, and everybody else who's talking about this, that we don't know how Iran would look like in, say, a few months if the regime collapses. If it doesn't collapse, how would that look like as well? Because if the war stops, why would it stop? Would Iran surrender? Or would Iran just, or would the US just declare some kind of victory and withdraw? I don't see the US withdrawing without making sure that Iran is too weak to attack US interests and US allies, and as well as Iran giving up on its nuclear system. So this is what Iran would look like after the end of the campaign. But politically, where would the country be heading? I think that's the $1 billion question.
But let's dwell on that question for a minute, Emile, because, on my visits to Iran, I was always struck by this sort of duality. On one side, there's the Iranian state that's been captured by the Revolutionary Guard and by the revolution and itself. And, these are entrenched institutions that have been running the place, running the economy, running the security apparatus for half a century. On the other side, you've got an incredibly sophisticated and educated, proud population that, asks you to kind of respect thousands of years of Persian history, points to the great monuments in places like Kashan and Isfahan. And, and these are the people many of whom have been demonstrating on the streets, many of whom are in exile, and they say, leave it up to us. We will be able to do for Iran what Iran deserves. So which one of these two Irans will prevail at the end of this process?
Look, there's no doubt that Iran has immense potential, human talent, a sophisticated economy, resilience, like few other societies, given what they went through and so on. The question is, what is the macro security framework for all that? If we're talking about in Iran, where there's increasing disorder, increasing instability, and so on, a lot of those, great people that you're talking about, Matt, may decide to, just go away, become refugees. This is it's not either the tough bad guys today winning or the good people coming on top. It's the scenario in the middle, where it's quite unstable. People don't want to leave. Some people invest locally, others call it a day and try to find opportunities elsewhere. The regime itself is going to be ruthless. The regime is protecting first and foremost the regime. The nation of Iran is something they hope to inspire, and if it works, great. But if the regime was really thinking in terms of the interests of the larger population, then perhaps it wouldn't have invested perhaps up to $500 billion directly and indirectly in a nuclear program that has never benefited the rest of the country, or in foreign adventures that don't exist. That haven't materialized into any kind of like hard security. I think that it's very difficult to see any of those two scenarios, either the tough guys prevailing totally and being able to restore the Islamic Republic the way it was, or the great people of Iran essentially taking figuring out a smooth transition that allows for the full stabilization of the country. And just to be clear, there's more at stake here. Let me rephrase that. There's a bigger picture there. First, there's a lot of Iran's critical infrastructure that's being destroyed in the process. Who's going to rebuild that? With what money? How do you rebuild an economy? And is the U.S. interested in accompanying that transition? This is not, the old conflict. And the second point is, let's keep in mind one thing. We're focusing a lot on Iran, as we should. The two attackers here, the U.S. has a pretty fraught record over those years, and Israel, which has spent 3 years committing some significant horrors in Gaza. So if you're looking from the other side, it's not as if you have those nice liberators coming and just paving the way for you. This is a pretty fraught situation, morally, politically, going forward.
And Muhanad, a really crucial question for me is, especially as someone who comes from Germany and kind of understood how incredibly important the Marshall Plan was for turning the ashes and the rubble of Germany after World War II, having taken the world to total ruin and tragedy, as a result of a dictatorship. The Americans then spent a lot of money and time to build Germany into a viable, economically successful, functioning democracy because it was in their interests. Do you think there's anyone at all in the White House, or indeed here in Jerusalem, who is thinking along those terms, whether it's a Marshall Plan or, I don't know, the Netanyahu Plan or any kind of plan that deals with rebuilding Iran after it's been, destroyed to a large extent? Because I don't see any such plan at the moment for the Gaza Strip when we had been promised something like a plan for the Gaza Strip?
The short answer is no. I don't see anybody in the White House or in Israel interested in. I don't think they even thought about that, what they would do in the next day. But I think, we to answer your question, the general one, who is going to prevail in Iran? Is it the radical side of of the equation, or is it the people, the great people of Iran? I think the great people of Iran would prevail, and they would lead their country into the future. And the reason why I say this, I lived in Iraq. We're next door to Iraq. So with what means basically the what I see is now a regime that has lost military wise, but also they have lost what I call the legitimacy narrative. In the past, this regime has been promising its own people that they would own or they would build their own nuclear capabilities. They will impose their strategic influence in their neighborhood and export the so-called revolution since 1979. All these have failed. So now their nuclear system is basically inoperable. What the regime has promised its own people, it could not deliver on that. They have told the people to, withstand sanctions for at least the last 20 years or even more, so that Iran could have this nuclear capability and then they would prosper after that. All of these have collapsed in front of the Iranian people. I don't see, even if this campaign does not succeed in toppling the regime, I don't see the regime making any kind of narrative to these people. What kind of promises they would give to the Iranian people? They're highly educated. They aspire to integrate into the world. They have a very, lively and educated diaspora who think that Iran has a massive potential. But who is holding them back? This very regime, this regime that is involved in religious wars, sectarian wars, and also this very regime wanted to own nuclear weapons that could not own, and also for no good reason. And so they don't, even the Iranian people, I don't see them now after what happened, supporting these militias in the region that have the banner of liberating Palestine. So we are in a front of if you like, a situation where the Iranians themselves want change, and what is happening now, which is a war that has been imposed on them, is something that they hope probably that it would help them to topple the regime. I think at least this is what the White House and Israel is hoping. But at the same time, the people are watching this useless war because they think that why our regime is fighting against these very powerful adversaries, while we know that we are going to lose this. It's not going to be easy. And if we win this against the U.S. And Israel by holding into, hostage the international economy and also attacking our GCC neighbors. But then we would end up after the war with regional enemies, no proxies, no good economy, and also, again, we are up against the U.S. and Israel.
I mean, Emile, at the moment, it seems to me, ever since October the 7th, especially, that for Israel, every problem in this neighborhood is a nail and every solution involves a hammer. And the reason why I asked about, any kind of Marshall Plan is that at the end of the day, if the Israelis want to have in their neighborhood a powerful but benign Iran, somehow someone needs to help them build that kind of society to bring out the better nature of Iran that has been hidden for the last 50 years. And I just wonder, do you think in Israel anyone is thinking along these lines? And if not, why not? Because ultimately, if they don't, then you're getting back to that cycle that we've seen over and over again, which is the Middle East of unintended consequences. They get rid of Gaddafi, they get civil war. They get rid of Saddam Hussein, they get ISIS. They get rid of the Iranian regime. What do they get?
Look, the Israelis are ruthless and realistic, and they, of course, they would hope for the best, but they're not going to spend a single dime, working towards that. I think After October 7, the view is that we, Israel, need to establish full military dominance, have operational freedom across the region. We need to be able to do as we please. And we expect the others to cave, adjust, and so on. But where we, Israel, are not about building a better tomorrow for anyone. I think the view is extremely cynical on the region. It's also, I think there's a lot of opportunism in there. I think this Israel is expansionist, territorially, politically, and so on. And I just don't see the Israelis as particularly interested in doing that. If Iran is uh, they should, just as they should be interested in Palestinian statehood and good humanitarian outcomes for Gaza and so on, and yet there is consensus across the board in Israel in favor of essentially the ethnic cleansing in Gaza, or the takeover, even a tougher operation in Iran. I mean, you will have noticed what Yair Lapid and others have said, and Bennett have said about all this. So I don't think one should expect, this kind of like sensible thinking, where there's a win-win formula at the end of the day that's adopted from Israel itself. And look, while I agree with Muhanad that the regime has lost legitimacy and support of much of the population, the key here is that it takes a small number of very committed people with guns and with a reason to fight, with enough to lose if they don't stand up and fight, to control a country. And this is why I don't write off the regime. You need to have a clear alternative. Everyone wishes the regime away. Almost everyone wishes the regime away, but not everyone can actually figure out what is the alternative. And the Iranian opposition has had almost 5 decades to come up with that. And we've seen that Donald Trump at one point embraces Pahlavi and then says, perhaps not him, and then talks about the Kurds and then perhaps not the Kurds. And so that's going to be quite fundamental. People want to see a sense of order, and it's not clear that this campaign is going to provide the kind of like security and order that people need to stay in their homes and build a better future.
Mohammed, finally to you. You're in Doha. Obviously, Qatar's been affected by this. So have the UAE. So has Bahrain. Dubai airport has been closed down yet again. I mean, for those Gulf states that were selling life in the Gulf, especially to expats, as life, in a low tax, safe haven in a very dangerous neighborhood, that model has been shot to pieces. I mean, I would say that they arguably are perhaps the biggest losers in all this, because they're ringside observers, and they didn't expect this to happen, and they really haven't had much of a response, and they've got very little tolerance for the kind of pain that's been inflicted. How do you see Doha and the others in your part of the world, dealing with this incredible challenge in the coming weeks and months?
Yes, so this is basically their nightmare scenario that they always wished it would never happen. But equally, they have been preparing for this for a long time. They knew that the day would come that some kind of a conflict in the region would happen with Iran or with somebody else that would affect the security of these countries. Iran was obviously the very potential candidate that would cause this kind of trouble to them. Iran has been threatening the region for some time. This is not the first time that the GCC has or had to deal with Iran. UAE has its own issues with Iran, over the islands. Saudi Arabia as well. The threats have been, if you like, exchanged for many years. Even Iran, mostly recently, Mohammed Jawad Zarif, he was here in Doha. And when he was asked about the islands issue with UAE, he said, don't open that can of worms, because we still think that we own Bahrain. Bahrain was our 19th province, and it was striking that after so many years and in the middle of a region that is marred by conflict. Mohammed Jawad Zarif, former Minister of Foreign Affairs of Iran, was talking in this way, this language to the region. So they knew about this, and yes, they have been so far absorbing a lot of attacks from Iran. But what they see here is basically at this point, and I think this is relevant to the whole to the whole conversation. What they see is that do GCC countries see that they can coexist with the current regime? Because this current regime has crossed every red line possible, and also has done everything that that all these countries in the GCC thought that it was not possible. And this explains why all these countries still today they're not calling on the US to stop the war. And I read yesterday a Reuters piece saying that GCC countries are calling on President Trump to finish the job. And I'm not sure if this is if the Reuters piece was quoting or getting the sources from the top leaders here, but I wouldn't be surprised, because now Iran is enemy of the region. This region would rebound. So maybe I end with this. This region would rebound because they have the means and the capability, and still they do have they can attract everybody who lost their trust in the region, not only with money, but also with the model they are providing, especially if there would be in the future some kind of regime change in Iran or attitude change in the future Iranian government.
We don't talk about the consequences for very ordinary people living in these countries between the missiles and their leaderships enough. So I just want to end, and I want a brief answer from both of you, even if it's going to be a slightly longer question. The fact is that there is an opportunity here that I'm sure some optimists in a cave somewhere, in the Wadi on the other side of the old city of Jerusalem still believes in, that you can turn all this chaos since October the 7th into a massive opportunity for a deal, a comprehensive deal, where the Saudis get on with the Israelis, the Iranians end up with a better government than they've been served by for the last 50 years, or subjected to, I should say. Is this deal pie in the sky, or is there actually a possibility that someone will come along and say we can make this happen, and this region is full of culture and opportunity and so many missed opportunities will finally have its day in the sun?
Well, I note, Matt, that in your description of the deal, you leave out the crucial element, which is Palestinian statehood.
No, I'm sorry. That was. I apologize. That was the most important part of it. Actually, that is the cornerstone. There cannot be a deal between the Saudis and Israel without Palestinian statehood. Absolutely. So take that as given.
And that's still at the heart of the issue. I think a lot of good things can happen if you address this issue directly, not dance around it, not design a multi-year process with weird conditionalities attached to it, and so on. Unless this is front and center in a negotiation, I think it's that deal that we would all like to see. We would like to see a region at peace in which Palestinians, Israelis, Lebanese, Iranians, people from the Gulf, from the various Gulf countries, and Iraq, and so on, live in peace and harmony. And yes, there is perhaps some prosperity at the end of that political realignment. But it would require the two most powerful players, Israel as the regional, the dominant regional military player, and the US, the global superpower, to make that decision. And we're still where we were at the same place as we were on October 6th, 2023. It's understandable that some of this stuff was hotly contested, but it's still at the heart of the debate.
Muhanad, by advocating for a kind of comprehensive settlement that obviously starts with the Palestinians and their statehood, which seems to be so far off the table at the moment in Israel, is this just pie in the sky stuff which we shouldn't even be talking about?
I think I agree with the fact that the Palestinian state, a Palestinian state for the Palestinians, that they would be content with. I think that's the cornerstone of any optimistic future for the region. And I think Arab states, they have the so-called Arab Initiative, where they said that if there is a Palestinian state, an independent Palestinian state, that the Palestinians are happy with all the rings attached, that we know that what Israel has been doing to the land and how complicated it is now to, carve out a Palestinian state, if that can be managed, then I think that would be a very solid step towards prosperity and stability in the region. And even with with the probability that there would be the same Iranian regime somehow in Iran, which I don't think that that it belongs to the future, but just for argument's sake, that it would deprive whatever such a regime the narrative of fighting against Israel, because the Palestinians would have their own state, its independence. So Iran would have no reason to have its proxies or say that we're going to liberate Palestine, because Palestine is an independent place. And so I think that would be a really a step forward to stabilize the region. Not the only step. There, obviously, we need more things to happen, but that is a cornerstone of peace in the region.
Now that would be victory, wouldn't it? But I think we're a long way off that. And I guess whether you assess when you assess victory and defeat depends very much at which point in time you choose. Tomorrow's victory for Israel and America could look like their defeat in, I don't know, a couple of years' time, when what results in Iran is even worse than what we've had so far. Unintended consequences. I keep getting back to that, as everyone else does too. Gentlemen, thank you very much for coming on the Forecast. Emile Hokayem and Muhanad Seloom, thank you very much to both of you. That's it from us here in Jerusalem. Hope you enjoyed it. Hope you found it interesting. See you soon.